Welcome, everyone, to New Futures for the Post-Pandemic Church, a continued conversation with Kenda, Creasy, Dean, and Paul Nixon, sponsored by the BTS Center, Ministry Incubators, and the Epicenter Group. Our mission here at the BTS Center is to catalyze spiritual imagination with enduring wisdom for transformative faith leadership. And in this year of profound disruption, deep loss, and tantalizing possibility, we need wise people who can catalyze our ministerial imaginations to respond creatively to this pivotal moment in our country's and in our planet's history. Thank you all for joining us for this conversation today. And I'd like to extend a special welcome to any of you who are tuning in from Facebook Live as well. My name is Ben Joshua Davis, and I'm Director of Applied Research at the BTS Center and host of this conversation with Kenda and Paul. Also with me is Kay Ahmed, our office manager, who will be managing the tech today, and our Executive Director, Alan Ewing-Merrill, who is managing the chat box and assisting with security. Alan, do you have a word of greeting you may be able to offer us today?
I would be glad to. Welcome, everyone. It's so great to see your faces out there in Zoom land. We're so glad to welcome you to this event, especially Paul and Kenda. We're just delighted that you accepted our invitation to join us once again for a conversation about the post-pandemic church. As Ben mentioned, the mission of the BTS Center is to catalyze spiritual imagination with enduring wisdom for transformative faith leadership. The roots of the BTS Center go back all the way to 1814, so more than 200 years of faithful ministry. And today, with that mission statement, we're really focused on our vision of human hearts renewed, justice established, and creation restored, and paying particular attention to the knowledge, skills, worldviews, and practices that faith leaders need in order to be faithful in ministry during a time of global climate devastation. Thinking about the intersection of spiritual leadership and the climate crisis. We're so glad that you've joined us today. We hope that you will share this event on Facebook and when the recording becomes available, and invite others to be a part of this ongoing conversation. Welcome.
Thank you, Alan. Although we've all gotten far too much practice with this over the last year, I want to offer a few Zoom etiquette reminders before we begin. First, if you haven't done so already, I invite you to name yourself so we know who's here. Secondly, we want to invite you to make sure to keep the chat, to keep yourself muted so as to reduce background noise so we can hear what Paul and Kenda have to offer us in conversation today. And finally, feel free to use the chat feature throughout the event if you find it helpful. I've increasingly heard people describe Zoom chat as kind of like the amen corner, or feel free to turn it off if that helps you focus on the conversation and hearing what you need to hear today. I'm going to invite you actually as we begin to introduce yourself in the chat, and I invite you to lift up for us where you're logging in from today and your burning question that this past year plus has raised for you about the future of your faith community. And as you do that and offer those up in the chat, let me tell you what we have in store for this afternoon. We'll start with a moderated conversation between our two guests, followed by a time for question and answers from all of you. Feel free to lift up those questions as they come to you during our conversation in the chat. Alan will get them to me and we'll ask as many as we can in the time we have. And finally, our guests. First, let me introduce to you Paul Nixon, who is the founder of the Epicenter Group. He is a pastor, coach, ministry strategist, and student of culture. He operates in multiple time zones and cultural contexts each week. Paul planted one of the earliest campuses of a multi-site Protestant congregation in the 1990s, a site that grew well past 1,000 worshipers a week. Paul has been coached to the fastest growing mainline Protestant church in the United States, Embrace Church Sioux Falls, and worked with dynamic church plants across the globe, in addition to writing a library of influential books such as I Refuse to Lead a Dying Church and the co-author of Weird Church, Welcome to the 21st Century. And Kenda, Creasy, Dean is an ordained United Methodist pastor in the Greater New Jersey Annual Conference and the Mary D. Synod Professor of Youth Culture and Church at Princeton Theological Seminary. In addition to teaching in practical theology, education, and formation, Kenda works closely with Princeton's Institute for Youth Ministry and the Farminary. She's the author of numerous books on youth, church, and culture, including Almost Christian, What the Faith of Our Teenagers is Telling the American Church. In 2013, she and fellow pastor Mark DeVries co founded Ministry Incubators Incorporated, an educational and consulting group dedicated to missional innovation and entrepreneurial forms of ministry. Now, as we come to this space, I expect that this last year has left many of us panting for breath. It has been a year of great change and great challenge for so many of us. So I'm going to invite us to pause for a moment and take a good breath together. First, I'd invite you to pay attention to how you're seated in your chair, whether your feet are firmly rooted on the floor. I invite you to take a deep, slow breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. And as you continue to breathe in and to breathe out, to become aware of whatever you're bringing into this space. And to breathe in the gifts that you need to be present, and breathe out all the distractions that are keeping you from showing up in this space together to hear what Paul and Kenda have to offer us. So together, let us breathe in and breathe out and be in conversation together. I'd like to begin with a chance for our conversation partners to introduce themselves. And so, Paul, I'd like to start with you. And I wondered if you could say for us just a couple words about what you're bringing to this conversation this year, a year after we had our former conversation together, and one new thing you've learned about your conversation partner in the last year.
Thanks. Thanks, Ben. I really appreciate the invitation to jump back into this conversation, and it's always great to be with Kenda. This past year, like many of the recent years in my life, has been a year of, it's been a river of conversation. One conversation leads to another that leads to another, and there's a couple of common strands to that conversation. The Holy Spirit flows along the whole chain of it, and I'm in the room. And then I have coaching clients that come and go and come and go, and some of them return in other venues over the course of that month. But it's been a year of conversation with hundreds of people, okay? And so just listening, you get a sense of sort of the meta narrative that begins to emerge, even as we're in this crazy, nimble season. And I've just been amazed at what's happened this year. Just been amazed at the innovation, at the hopefulness, at the churches that thrived, even when the way we've worshiped closed down. So we can say more about that in a minute, but that's kind of what I bring. I just bring lots of other conversations into this conversation. And I work mostly in the Western Hemisphere, from the UK to California in that zone. My friend Kenda, one of the things I learned about her this year is you can throw an extra book project at her, and she'll say no, and then you ask again and she says no, and then you ask a third time and she says, well, maybe, and then she squeezes it in somehow. So I'm assuming that you never sleep.
Well, asking 3 times is quite biblical, Paul. So I appreciate that. Kenda, what are you bringing into this space, and what might you offer us something new you've learned about your conversation partner over the last year, besides that he likes to ask very persistently about book projects?
Oh man. Well, this year has been. I've been one of those people who just didn't accomplish a lot during pandemic. I don't know. It wasn't painful time. I mean, we were blessed that we were sheltered from a lot of the pain that a lot of people felt. But my husband and I were cooped up together for a lot of months, and it was delightful. But my motivation took a hike. And then about December, I kind of felt myself re-enter again, and there was a freshness to it, which I'm grateful for. There has been so much in terms of upheaval and that kind of stuff. And I know that there are churches. I've been consulting during this whole time as well as teaching, I know there are churches that have done well and churches that haven't done well. But I think actually one of my hopes is that the churches that haven't done well, um, and by well, I guess I think that it challenges us to change our metrics a little bit. Um, I think that actually there's good news in not doing so well right now. It may be the jolt we need to get on a new track. So anyway, and what I learned about Paul is that you are amazingly persuasive. I had no intention of writing another book this year, but here we are. And by the way, Paul also has a book in the same series. It's the Great Expedition series, if anybody cares. And there are like 15 or 16 books that are intended for churches in the position that we are all in right now. So if you care, you can Google it.
Wonderful. I wanted to dial us back to the conversation we had a year ago. And for those of you who perhaps weren't part of that conversation, about a year ago, last June, in fact, we invited Paul and Kenda to come on in the middle of all the crazy. It was quite a tumultuous time. I don't know if that's stuck, but it definitely felt like a moment that was particularly intense. To talk to us about the shape of the shape of ministry, what you were beginning to learn about how faith communities were engaging with this moment, both engaging with the coronavirus and also with the epidemic of police violence and the march and the real march against racial injustice. By the way, if you didn't see that conversation, you can find a link to it on our website, but you won't need to know a thing about it for this conversation today, because we're actually going to show you a couple clips from it. Last year, you both shared with us your greatest hope and deepest fear about what this next year would bring. And now, of course, it's a year later. So now we can go back and check in with you about those things. And Kenda, we're going to start with you. Here's a little bit about what you shared with us last year about your greatest hope and your deepest fear.
I think my biggest hope is that the magnitude of what we have been through and are going through right now relativizes, kind of puts in perspective a lot of our church squabbles that we have spent enormous energy and time and resources arguing about stuff that in the end is not what this is about. It's not about life, death, and resurrection. It's about other stuff. And I love the idea that we are like, oh yeah, that thing that we spent years arguing over, yeah, that's not what matters right now. What matters right now is that, we make sure that people don't die, right? That feels a lot more on brand to me about what the church is supposed to be about. I think my fear is that, maybe I'm more cynical than Paul is here. I think it will be really easy for us not to change very much after this. As we have the best shot at changing now than we have had in a century, but we also have 500 years of bad habits that we will easily snap back to if we're not intentional about taking the opportunity to try new things, to be a different kind of organization, to work in the world in ways that we've forgotten how to do. I mean, it'll be easier to default. It's a lot easier. The ship is broken. It's a lot easier to repair the old ship, put it back on the water, than to build a new one.
So Kenda, tell me about your experience. Where have you seen your greatest hopes and deepest fears realized or not realized this last year?
Yeah, that's a little spooky to see yourself a year ago right now. Well, I mean, I think that it is true that we've set aside our squabbles for a while. To the degree that they come back to us, I think they will some. But hopefully we have a different perspective on that. I think it's a little too soon to tell whether we're going to snap back to our old ways or not. During the pandemic, research on whether people were coming back to church, people reported that they planned to come back to church. And I have to admit, I'm suspicious of those reports. And from what I read this week, the attendance right now is down about 30%, something like that. So I don't know whether our self-reports will materialize in the way that we anticipated that they would. Um, but I think I'm most interested to find out whether we look at these shifts that are dramatic enough we can't just pretend they're not there. And I think that's a good thing. And I actually think I've taken a lot of solace this year in the shipwreck story in Acts, and where Paul is on the boat, and they get in the storm and the ship breaks apart. But every single person makes it to shore, and they do that by hanging on to broken parts of the ship. And so the very same thing that is destroyed is what saves them, right? And so they wind up on this unknown shore, is what the text says, and they find out eventually that it's Malta. I think we're on Malta right now. I think we've been through some shipwreck, and we're all kind of pleasantly surprised to find out that we're still here. And we're here because there are pieces of the tradition and pieces of these congregations we've been part of that have carried us here safely. But we have to put them together in a very new way now. With and we're in this unknown place where we don't know what the other materials are, where we don't know who the people are. They don't know us. And the truth is, they're not so interested they're interested in befriending us and in being friends with us. They're not so interested in being reached. Anyway, so I think that there's a huge opportunity in this. I love the fact that we anticipate. We talk about that story as Paul bringing Christianity to Malta. He's the patron saint of Malta. But I think God used Malta to save Paul, not the other way around. And I wonder whether God is using this moment of shipwreck in the church to save the church. And what will it look like for us to take these pieces that that have come ashore with us in this weird new place where we find ourselves? What kind of new ship will we build? That's the question I've got right now.
Mm. That is a beautiful metaphor and a beautiful story to help us interpret the institutional wreckage that I think so many of us have experienced over this last really confusing year, and realizing there is no getting back to normal because there's not a normal to get back to. Paul, let's share a clip from what you had to share with us last year.
I think I'm going to get to live to actually see this Reformation. I wasn't sure if we were moving into like this 40-year, limbo place where it was going to happen when I'm passed off the earth. But if I'm thinking that we're going to see a new thing emerging out of the chaos of this transition. I think this year has really sped up a transition that's been going on for most of our lifetimes as we're moving out of the Christendom age. And it's just finally, Christendom age finally just spit us all out, like Jonah, we just hit the beach. And now I really believe in the next few months, not years, at the rate it's changing, there will be some new awareness in terms of what we can be doing, what we should be doing, what is church really, where there's praying going on, that reformation and that discovery will happen. I mean, there's always going to be churches that kind of sleep through revolution and they go back and try to do what they were doing before, bless their hearts. But I think a lot of folks have been awakened right now. And I think that's exciting and encouraging. To lead at this juncture could be dangerous if we're only rallying the dwindling crowd and sounding irrelevant to everybody else.
So, Paul, share with us your reactions to hearing your voice from a year ago and how those hopes and fears were actualized or not actualized.
Well, the first thing I would say is there's a beach metaphor going on here. Jonah is getting spit up on the beach. Paul's wrecking on the beach, and the beach after the turbulence of what both Paul and Jonah went through. The beach is a very pleasant thought, because it's it, it's a, it, I don't want to say calm, but it's a grounding in a new place after a season of turbulence. So the whole whether you get spit up on the beach or your ship crashes on the beach, which the idea of getting spit up or crashing is not pleasant, but the beach itself sounds really really good. So that's the first thing I'll say. The next thing is that thinking about Kenda's story about Paul. About 5 years ago, one of my co-authors and her husband and our family, we took a cruise. We'd finished writing the book. The book's about to come out. And we just said, let's go on a cruise. Let's go to some of those places. And we went to Greece and Ephesus and various places. And about the same time of year, maybe the same day of the year and the same GPS, we found ourselves in a storm north of one of those islands, okay, Crete or Malta, or we were in that part of the world, and it was crazy. It was hurricane level winds 2 nights in a row, and there was a little barge next to us that was we're a big ship, and this little barge will just the waves just swallow it. It's just like it becomes a submarine, and then it comes up again, and that memory came back in the midst of Kenda's story. And then on our ship, I get up early. I'm an early bird, even when I'm in that part of the world. And I was up early to find some, bad coffee to drink. And the indoor pool, the water would come up out of it. All of the water would come up out of it and suspend in the air. And then it was dry down there. And then it would come back and go up the other direction. Okay. So I don't think they had a pool on Paul's ship, but that gives you some sense of the motion. And somehow or another, by the grace of God, I was not seasick, although there were very few people out and about that day. This has been the reason I go back through that is a metaphor of kind of what we've been through this year. It was a crisis. It was turbulent. And there was turbulence on multiple fronts. I mean, the pandemic was one piece of the turbulence, but we also have dealt with other aspects of turbulence, some of which we desperately needed to deal with, and others I'm not so sure. But it's been a turbulent season in many, many ways. There are some things that happened this year that if you would have said going into this year, that's going to happen this year, you go, no, it's not. And it happened, this year. So in the midst of that, I don't know. We're not quite out on the beach yet, but I am hopeful that there is a beach, and that we are coming up on it soon. Let me see if there's anything more I want to say right now than that. I'm very, very hopeful about that. I will say just one other piece, and I'll get to more later. There has been, because of the disruption and the chaos, it has been enough to break some significant paradigm rut thinking in the life of the mainstream Protestant movement that even the Reformation itself didn't budge. And it began to budge this year. And that's interesting to me, but we'll come back to that in a moment.
I think it's really interesting how both of you speak about disruption this last year and acknowledge that there was profound disruption within our religious institutions, that there is pain with that there's disorientation with that, and that there's also within that potential for something profoundly productive for the church. And I'm reminded how often, even in my own life, oftentimes the periods of greatest change and growth were also the periods of greatest fear and pain and grief, and how so often those things come together. And it's often how do we engage with those really disruptive moments that determines the sort of people we become as we grow up and mature. And I wonder if we've kind of hit one of those moments as well as kind of an American religious body. I want to ask you about one of the main ways that people experienced this disruption. And Quentin, we're actually anticipating your question here. So thank you for offering that for us. The pandemic has really changed the ways we understand about what it means to gather, especially in digital spaces. We've learned about the nature of community and gathering. We can't be in person with one another. In my role as retreat leader, I can't tell you the number of times that I remind people digital space can be sacred space. Digital space can be sacred space. Um, so, what do you think we've learned about this nature of community and gathering? And what do you see faith communities taking forward or not taking forward into a future when in person gatherings become possible again? And Paul, this time we'll start with you.
Okay. Well, the disruption has been more pronounced in some places than others. One of my clients is a pastor in Oklahoma, in a town that basically half the people believe there never really was a COVID crisis. No, that's overstatement. There's a lot of people, and part of the reason was they just went about their business. They did not allow it to be as disruptive to their life as some other places did, for good reasons, I think, but they just didn't. So there were a lot of asymptomatic cases and people that had, and so forth, and they just moved on. And so in that case, the church that he serves is going back exactly to what they were doing before. They did not experience the disruption, and to some degree, they didn't experience the gift of what a disruption would have been. So, and there's quite a few places like that in the world. Hybrid is in, and it's not a church phenomenon or a church innovation. It's a cultural phenomenon. The way that we do community as a culture, the way we as families, as work teams, as neighborhood homeowners associations, as volunteers for civic agency boards and groups doing, all of this kind of thing, the way we do education, all of this kind of thing has moved online. And it was already moving that way, but it's moved more that way. And we realized you can have some pretty good meetings on Zoom. You can have some really bad ones too, but it's really possible to do some good work, especially if you can break out into smaller conversation groups. So hybrid's here. I mean, we are getting digitalized in the way we do community. And at the same time, I went to an old time Methodist men's breakfast on Wednesday. Okay. And everybody's double vaccinated. Like our whole town is almost herd immunity. We've got 80% plus vaccinated. And we sat down at the table. The average age at the table is 75. We sat down at the table. Everybody just took their masks off. And then this one guy came in, and I knew him because he has this winsome smile. I know him from church. And he just came straight toward me. And he just stuck out his hand, and we shook hands. And it was a sacrament. And I never thought about that before, because it was just one of those things we always do. Then the next day, I saw a person, one of my former colleagues, who was on vacation in this city, and we embraced, both vaccinated, and so moving into this space, touch is really, really a beautiful and wonderful thing, and we appreciate it. Now that'll wear off, and we'll kind of get back. But the hugs and handshakes, they're both problematic in terms of germs and intimacy issues and all that kind of stuff. They're both problematic. Touch is a tricky thing, and at the same time, we desperately need it. We have to steward it, but we need it.
I'm reminded as you talk, we're still negotiating what it means to be humans with bodies and how that embodiment is really important. And what we thought we needed bodies for that we found out we didn't, that actually Zoom works quite well, thank you. And what things we find are really irreplaceable about being material beings. Kenda, what about you?
It's not a Zoom call if somebody doesn't say you're on mute at least once.
It's like our new "The Lord be with you."
It really. I really love those stories, Paul, and yeah, I think that the desire for human presence in embodied ways has become kind of sacramental. I mean, we don't really even know whether we can trust it yet, right? So we're tentative about it's precious still, and I wonder how long that will last. But it's a good place to be right now. Um, yeah, I also think you're right about hybrid is in that we are entering a time when there's disruption has been a common enough experience now. Like you, we just got back from a funeral in West Virginia this past weekend, and you know honestly in West we crossed the state line and it was like pandemic, what pandemic, that there were so few trappings of the shutdown that are still very prevalent in New Jersey, and it was an interesting study in contrast. But it did allow for kind of a family reunion at this funeral. People were were way more overjoyed about seeing each other than I think normally would have been the case. Um, I also think though that one of the things that it's done is we talked about this at one point, Ben. It's sort of demystified our relationship with technology a little bit. I mean, I don't know what your communities were like, but where where I teach, it's like technology was like this mysterious thing that was going to somehow eat us alive if we got into it. And people really were pretty intimidated by using it, and viewed Zoom as a threat to education, which it can't be. But it also, I mean, it's like once a pencil was a threat to somebody, and now it's just a tool. And I think that's going to be true of the way we approach technology too. I think in a lot of ways it became far less strange. And I I think we talked about this the last time, but I actually do think that in a lot of ways we got drop kicked 20 years into the future, and nobody had any time to argue, so we just went with it. And I think that that actually will work with us. What I do think will be precious to us in ways that we will probably be far more intentional about developing is I think we're going to see some months, maybe years of some hyper local kinds of ministry and relationships. I think we're going to be far more focused on neighboring than on lofty ideas of mission. And I think that's a really good move. I was talking to a guy whose ministry I admire a lot. He's a young pastor in a struggling little church, a Lutheran church in Trenton, and they, he's always sweating the budget and all of that kind of stuff. And during early in the pandemic, he realized that their food bank at this church, which normally might get 20 people a week, suddenly was getting 100 people a week. So they were running out of food. So he contacted other churches, including ours, to say, "Can you help us? Build up the food supplies here." So we did. Well, anyway, in the process of building up the food supplies, he begins to see more. He gets to know some people in the neighborhood that he didn't know before, and he realized that a lot of them are there because school is shut down, and so now they have to create more meals than they used to. So anyway, then he realizes, well, kids seem to need school lunches. So then he contacts all of the churches in the neighborhood and says, how about if you make some lunches? So we all made lunches and passed those out for a while. And Eric realized then that some people were taking 7 or 8 lunches, and he didn't understand that. So he asked about it, and he finds out, oh, well, that's because with school shut down and the internet access is so bad in this neighborhood, all of the kids are clustered in one house that has good internet, so they can do school together. And so then Eric's like, well, shoot, well, maybe we ought to be trying to get better internet for the community. And so it's in getting to know, and so in trying to get better internet, he gets to know some people, finds out they don't have stimulus checks. The next thing you know, he's at the state capitol trying to get people stimulus checks. All of this happened because for the first time, he really knew his neighbors. It's getting to know our neighbors that love is what spurs us to ministry. It's not because we have great ideas. It's not because we have some lofty calling. It's just that there are people out there who we need to get to know. And in getting to know them, our ministries will be given to us. So I think that is going to be a far more common way of thinking about ministry. And I look forward to that.
Can I just add to what Kenda's saying here? We're as I listen here, we're breaking out beyond the church membership line in terms of how we do the beloved community. There's a more
Right.
intentionality the neighboring has to go way beyond, the roster and the Olin Mills directory. And then at the same time, we're breaking out of even as we're getting into the neighborhood, we're breaking out of geography, because that Lutheran pastor in Trenton probably has 50 parishioners that are just right there. Then there's 200 relationships that have emerged in the immediate geographic neighborhood. Then there's a family that's moved to Las Vegas for a job, and they're coming back on Zoom.
Right. Right.
And there's people that go to Florida to escape snow, and they're connecting on Zoom. And then there's some random people in Ireland that were just playing with Google one day, and they find them and they start going to a Lutheran church in New Jersey. And so community is, even as it's getting deeper in one neighborhood, the geography lines
And
are more
I
close.
think, yes, to all of that, and add one other layer that I didn't even think about until somebody was telling me about this in his experience. There are people that are that are part of us that we don't even know don't consider church accessible, right? The example that he was giving was there are people who have mobility issues, for example, or they have this one woman who's a parent of a kid who had some kind of disruptive behavioral problems. Bringing him to church was so difficult that they just stopped coming. I think that's a really common story for parents. And but this online community gave them a way to participate, not just gave them access, but gave them equal access.
Mm.
They were not treated any differently than anybody else. They were getting the same quality of experience that everyone else was. And it elevated them to become part of the community in a way that they had not experienced before, which I thought was really profound. And I felt ashamed that I hadn't thought about that earlier.
Hmm. I think one of the things that you're both speaking to is the way that, I mean, we might have eventually gotten there in digital spaces, but I think, Kenda, you were very apt last year in saying we've been drop kicked 20 years into the future. And that's true for our faith communities, but I also think it's true for our society as a whole.
Agreed.
So I'm curious, then, for both of you, in what ways has the pandemic sped up already existent social trends, and in what ways do you think this is going to impact the ministry of faith communities in the country? And Kenda, before you answer, I just want to turn out to all of you and say, in a few minutes we'll be beginning our facilitated Q&A. So if you have questions, make sure to put them in the chat, and we can have some conversation about them together. So Kenda, what are your thoughts about how those trends are being accelerated?
Well, I'm trying to think of a really good one that I want to hang on to, but I've been doing a lot of work with a negative one recently, so that's on my mind. The one that I worry about is the increasing homogeneity of our congregations. It used to be that we could count on going to church with people who weren't like us, who weren't. They were our neighbors, but they didn't always think like us. But now we are in the habit, and it's not just the church, right? But the church is kind of a microcosm of this a lot of times. We can choose our communities, and the online access has made that even easier to choose our communities. We're not just going to church because it's the church in the neighborhood, and we get to choose to be with people who think like us. And the data that we have on that is that's a big change in the way churches are made up. It wasn't too long ago that you could still encounter lots of different points of view within one congregation, but even in very small congregations, that's less and less true. Mega churches are kind of the exception to that. But what's happening is that as we are getting to the point where we are so fractured ideologically as a culture, churches are echoing that fracturing rather than resisting it. And of course, with these deep ideological divides, these are proxies for every kind of divide that we have, whether it's race or whether it's economics or whatever. But we are so split culturally that the church has kind of lost track of our role in trying to be the bridge builder. I heard one scholar this past week talk about this in terms of um, we are split in part because we have this rhetoric of purity culture, and in trying to purify ourselves or purify our congregations or whatever, we just get rid of those things that don't feel comfortable to us. And the church actually has all of the resources we need to reframe that conversation. We should be the ones offering the alternative to that, a different kind of approach. But right now, we've been sort of sucked into the ideological divides of our broader culture. I'll talk more about that in a minute, but that's the one that comes to mind right now.
Hmm. What about for you, Paul?
Well, I think in this particular era, and I think the disruption of the last year helped to clarify this, and I think it did speed this up. There's a especially among the younger folks who are in the Christian movement, there is a significant shift in terms of the understanding of discipleship, and it's moving beyond a focus on just pietism to sort of a new framing of what does it mean to be Christians in the world, um, bringing healing in the world. And there are three themes, and in the United States, this gets polarized. These three themes, we see them on the progressive side of the polarization: climate crisis, race and justice crisis, LGBTQ rights. And those are all used to, it was just the LGBTQ thing, and then these other two issues have just really significantly emerged. And the interesting thing about those issues, at least in my denomination, where we have millions of members in Africa, they have great ambivalence around the questions of sexual identity and orientation, but no ambivalence about climate crisis, none whatsoever, and no ambivalence about race and justice crisis, none. And so there's a sense in which a global um, consensus is growing among young adult Christians that is going to, I think, redefine and clarify the issues of discipleship for the 21st century. Um, and that's a good thing, and that I see that emerging. The other thing is that I think one of the dangers right now is that we talk about Zoom or Zoom-like platforms. That is no more the answer to a declining church than sanctuary worship services. And to many younger adults, to sit in a passive Zoom meeting is like sitting in a bad work meeting or going to school, and it's no more interesting or especially on a weekend between the hours of 9 and 12, no more interesting or engaging than the idea of going and sitting in a sanctuary. Um, which brings us back to the fact that we have to contend with the ways that our paradigm of Sunday morning worship has distorted the mission and the movement of the gospel.
Mm.
And we can do it on Zoom or we can do it in a room, but it's still, I see a lot of churches that are spirit sensitive right now that are moving away from weekly worship, or who are moving away from the weekly larger gathering, moving to more home gatherings, or home gatherings and mission engagement, justice and mercy both. And there's a New York City church that I was just in conversation with that's going to monthly worship. A South Carolina new church start that was gathering big numbers at South Carolina, on weekends, meeting in a school, going to about once every 6 weeks. This is a shift, and it's happening out of an understanding that the Spirit is moving in a new generation in a way that I think enables us to be church in fresh ways that get beyond the paradigm that what it means to be Christian or to quote unquote go to church is to go engage a program carefully planned for you for an hour, on Sunday morning.
Mm. My, I think you're going from preaching to meddling there, Paul. Talking about our Sunday morning worship idolatry. I wanted to ask you, you have both presented us with some really big challenges and some pretty fundamental paradigm shifts to either step into, or at least for our communities to seriously consider. And I wonder if any of you, if either of you might be able to speak briefly into the reality that there is this huge pull back to normal that many faith communities are feeling after this time of dislocation. I can't tell you the number of people I've heard in my contacts who are talking about how excited they are to go back to normal because this year has been very stressful. And I'm wondering if either of you might have just a couple words of advice to give to faith communities and especially to faith leaders about what it looks like to enter this quote post pandemic reality well and to constructively work with this pull back to normal that so many faith communities are oftentimes very logically feeling right now. Either of you have any thoughts?
Um, well, I do think that it's going to take a little time for us to realize that there is no such thing as going back to normal. We're gonna try to beat that dead horse until we're too tired to keep going. But um, I think it's a natural thing for people to first try to snap back to where they were. But I don't think it's going to work real well. I think people are going to not only find that the programs and things that they used to succeed with don't have the same pull, but also they don't have the same heart. People's hearts are in different places. I've been reading a lot of Walter Brueggemann, so I think now is a really good time for a prophetic imagination. And he lists three different kind of practices of if you're going to have a prophetic imagination. Here are the three stages, and I would add a fourth one. He says first you name the reality. You know, name it for what it is. Be honest about the reality that you are facing. And the second one, and I think this is the step that we're going to skip if we're not careful. And he says, take time to grieve.
Mm.
Grieve. There's some stuff that's not there that you're missing, or things aren't working the way you want them to, or what. Just acknowledge it and take some time to grieve. And the church has practices for this. We have some resources for this. This kind of we may be the community that best equipped to help people grieve the changes that are afoot. But then the third thing is basically articulate the new imagination. Articulate the new thing that God is up to. I like to think about that as God's dream come true, is the way Gregory Boyle puts it. By that he means radical kinship. But the idea that God has a dream, and we've been given glimpses of it. So the fourth thing that I would say is, and do something that gives people a glimpse of what that looks like. But that's because I'm a practical theologian. So
Mm. I'm reminded of the incredible parallels there with some of the conversations that we have had at the BTS Center about how we engage with climate, and that in fact that paradigm very much works when we talk about acknowledging the reality that this is happening and that it's serious and there are parts of it that are already irreversible. To grieve and lament what is lost and what will already be lost, to offer up an imagination for what a new future for planetary flourishing can look like, and then to go out and do something about it. I think in many ways that fourfold pattern really applies to many of the major challenges that we are facing as a species right now as well. So thank you for that, and thank you for reminding us about Brueggemann, who is very good at afflicting the comfortable, as this year has done for all of us. Paul, what about for you? Just a couple words of advice.
Yeah, I love the fourfold. I'm going to ponder that. That's really wonderful. I would just say, as you're coming back in, people. I mean, it's been a year and a half almost. Um, we're still in disruption, even as we come back, and even when you come back, you can't sing the way you want to, and all. So seize upon the weirdness to make changes, to just do stuff differently, to take what you've learned and pull it on through into as you're beginning to regather in physical space. Don't gather in exactly the same way. Yeah, give people some of what they're used to, but you can't give them all of it, and you can get away with stuff right now. They're just so happy to be back and to see one another. you can get away with all kind of things that would have been an issue before, but right now, in all of the hubbub, you could sneak in some new worship elements, and you could just say, well, we're coming back in this kind of weird season, and we're wanting to sort of reestablish, and you can just talk your way out out of almost any trouble you get into. So be creative right now, and try some things that you don't have to. You can do it one week, and you don't have to do it the next week. I think getting out of the rut of of a liturgical rhythm that's the same from week to week, and allowing it to sort of breathe, and doing some things on a monthly basis, and sort of keeping a little surprise element, you could probably get away with that right now. Mm. Go for it.
Embrace the weird. I love that. I think that should become our new tagline in so many of our churches. And now we have Paul Nixon, reputed coach and author, who tells us that that's what we should be doing.
That needs to be a t-shirt, Paul, for your, embrace the weird.
Embrace the weird. I love it. I want to lift up a couple of the questions that we've received from folks in the audience. One person was noting how one of the opportunities this may give is to start hopefully building some intergenerational bridges that might have broken down between perhaps the traditionalists who now realize that things aren't working as well as they did, and the younger generations who still are looking for a spot in spiritual community. That intergenerational ministry could, in fact, be an important part of the way that we move forward as a faith community. I also want to lift up this question that I got that I think is really honest and important. And this person says, while this vision of the future is exciting, what about the reality that pastors currently leading churches are exhausted, burnt out, and depleted? And I would add to that a lot of the key core volunteers in those churches as well. This has been a really hard year, leading through this last year of tumult. What might you say to the reality that many people are not coming into the situation feeling like the wind is at their back, but are feeling completely burnt out from this year of trying to keep it all together?
I think desperation is a spiritual gift. I mean, I think if you're too tired to do all the things you used to do, don't do those things anymore. I mean, one and to connect it with what you said just a minute ago, Ben, one thing that we have done, a lot of churches have done during pandemic, is we have listened very seriously to young people because they're the only ones who know how to run the technology, right? And so if we were going to do online anything, we had to let them lead us. This is if we're too tired to lead, let's get out of the way and let some young people do it for us. They are already moving us in these directions. And what we need not to do is take the reins back. We gave them the keys and let them drive for a little while. It's time for us to let them keep going and serve as their champions, serve as the people who are kind of the wind in the sails of all sorts of people in and outside of our immediate congregational communities. But if we're too tired to do the things that we used to do, good. Stop doing it.
What about you, Paul?
Well, simplicity is in order right now. And again, to come back to what I'm sensing is happening, I think there is a simplifying of what ministry is in a lot of places. I see worship, even as we're doing the online things that may continue in a lot of places, I see a simplifying in terms of the amount of planning that goes in. I think there can be an increase in the number of laity who are preaching on any given Sunday in America. We have a layperson preaching this Sunday at our church, and I watched him tape it yesterday, and it's just like, oh my goodness, it's just marvelous because he's so prepared. Because this is like, how often does he get to preach a sermon? He's so prepared, and his content is good, his exegesis is good, it's fresh, it's like, what? And just think what a gift that was to our pastor this week. So I think keeping it simple, not overproducing in this season. And if you're worn out, don't feel like you have to bring it all back this summer, because people really don't want to come back to church this summer. They want to just go out they want to go to the national park. They want to go fishing. They want to go see family. They just want to they want to have barbecue. They want to go bike riding. I mean, so there's the whole world is trying to just come out and play in the sun. We need to let them do that. That's okay. And so we can take our time. We don't have to have everything ready to come back indoors and do the online all at the same time. I mean, just let's be realistic, and let's use young people that are willing to volunteer and feel helpful in the spiritual community. Um, every church I see that is coming back well right now is leaning into that, and it's amazing. They're really. It always makes you feel good for someone to ask you, "Can you help?" and to feel like, "Hey, I can be helpful here." I think most young people, the way we do church, feel like there's nothing for me here, and they don't always just want to be consumers. Sometimes they want to be helpful. And moving away from a consumer mentality to, I mean, just the time it takes to prepare preaching when you are memorizing or trying to internalize a presentation versus when you were preparing to offer an exegetical perspective and then to hold space for a conversation. That honestly is an art that you learn, but on a week into week, that doesn't take as much time. And that may be what we need to do as well. I just think we need to go easy on ourselves, get plenty of sleep, and when it's time to take that Sabbath, just go, even if there is no sermon on Sunday, and just finally just get up and see what God brings on Sunday. I really believe that rest is critical. Rest and prayer space is critical to all the rest of it, and it just has to go in first, and the rest of it
Yeah.
will sort itself out.
I just want to underscore what you said, Paul, the simplicity business, that we learned a lot of that during pandemic. We couldn't do anything else, right?
Yeah.
So we learned to make ministry about relationships again. That's all we could do. Let's not lose that going forward. And I teach youth ministry, so you expect me to say this stuff, but I think young people can teach us how to do that.
I I think it's wonderful the catchphrases that are coming out of this. Seize the weirdness. Desperation is a spiritual gift. That's a T-shirt I might buy in my congregational context. I also just want to say I think it's also important in spaces like this where I know there are probably some people who are watching this right now who are in the position of being burnt out spiritual leaders to say, um, we see you. It's just been a really hard year. The future really is uncertain, and you may not feel like you have the gas in the tank to seize joyfully all the possibilities that we have been talking about, and that is okay. You are not alone. I think this has been a year of suffering. And going back to your point, Kenda, about grieving, I think one of the things we can grieve is that we're coming into this wide open season without the energy to step into it with the way we want. And sometimes with the desperation to return to normal, because that is not as hard as what we have done for this whole time. And so I just want to offer up that word as someone who is the spouse of a leader of a small, old New England congregation who has been leading them through a difficult year, and knowing that some of you are in that context as well, that I think there are no perfect solutions to this moment. And there are things even in this moment where we won't be able to pick up in the way that we wanted. And that's okay, because we're humans. And in the end, this is God's church and not ours. And so in the end, I think sometimes we have to be able to rest in trust that in the end, this isn't our thing to fix. This isn't our thing to fix anyway. Thanks be to God, even though that statement brings with it a fair amount of terror, or at least it does for me as well.
Can I add too that if you're burned out coming out of the pandemic and you're just wondering, how long do I want to keep doing parish ministry? Pray about taking a break. The world won't end when any of us step out of that role, either on a permanent basis or or for a time. And it might be good to go play in a different sandbox and just kind of step away for a little while. I really don't think that's necessarily copping out. If because when we're burned out, we need to take seriously that situation, and it's a good thing. That's a good conversation.
That's a wonderful invitation and permission to give. I wondered if one of you might briefly. We're coming to the end of our time for facilitated Q&A, but I think Robin brings up another theme that we talked about last year, which is about Black Lives Matter, about white privilege and white supremacy and systemic racism, and the work that we're doing or not doing with that. And I wondered if either of you might, just for a couple minutes, offer us a couple words about where you think faith communities are at and what it means to continue to engage in that conversation, which is a spiritual conversation. You know, engaging racism is spiritually formative work. What can churches do to keep engaged in that conversation going forward, or if they haven't been up to this point, to start that conversation?
Well, I guess I'm using this as a soapbox for youth ministry right now, but I mean, again, follow young people. They're already there. They're already in it. And I don't. I'm responding to a conversation happening in the sidebar, but um, uh, these don't have to be young people that are in our congregations. You know, there are young people out there in the lives of people that we pastor that we're never going to see in the pew, but that doesn't mean they need Jesus any less. And so I think a lot of where we need to go as communities generally, young people are already there. I know of one church, one community where the churches said they weren't going to be part of a Black Lives Matter rally, and the kids in the community said, "Wait, no, you're the church. This is what we go to church for." So yeah, we are. And so anyway, the young people got their churches involved in it, and it became a transformative moment for this little community. But um, we can listen to people we're not used to listening to, who have been on the margins, and I think um, it won't hurt us to follow unexpected leaders.
Hmm. Amen to all of that. And the online or the digital means the digital tools we have means we do not have to bring young people out on a Sunday morning when they really needed to get some sleep. Um, we can film conversations during the week that can be presented with our congregations, but the congregation needs to be hearing dialogue, observing, watching, discerning dialogue that's happening with neighbors and neighbors, and with who are persons of color and persons that are white. They need to be hearing young people talk about the pressing issues of our time. Um, and we can give them that because it's not that hard to convene folks for a conversation. Maybe to put them up on the church chancel is a little tricky, but to say let's have a conversation, we're going to record it. Maybe it'll be good for the church to be in on this conversation. Um, that's what I would say.
So I want to name a couple questions that we didn't get a chance to ask, to put them in this space, and hope that we'll find ways to continue our conversation. One person was asking about kind of what are the foundational issues that Protestantism hasn't shifted since its inception that are beginning to shift now, which I think is a very promising conversation. So think about the ways that we are kind of going through that 500-year-old rummage sale that I think Phyllis Tickle talked about. Also, a question about what role do ecumenical organizations like a National Council of Churches or something like that have to play in shaping the role of the future church? And I just want to name those questions as important ones for us to hold as part of this ongoing conversation. Paul and Kenda, I want to ask you to tell us a little bit more about what you're up to. Where can we find out more about you and about your group? What's the most exciting project you've got going on right now? And Kenda, let's start with you and Ministry Incubators.
Well, Ministry Incubators is doing a ton of work with different conferences right now, basically working with congregations that are just feeling their way through this in terms of trying to start something new. And there are so many different things. It's hard to think of one. I'll lift up this, though. It's not Ministry Incubators as much as it is Princeton Seminary and some others that are involved in this. But I do think let's watch for this conversation about these ideological divides, whether it's over race, whether it's over politics, whether it's over a lot of different things, because I think we're going to see an opportunity for churches to become really necessary resources in communities for that. And so that exciting might not be the right word, but timely feels like the right word.
Indeed. And Paul, what about for you and Epicenter Group?
Every church I work with is the most interesting thing in the world. So, and they're all different. And I really do treasure the time when I get to work with congregations. So I don't even know where to begin. I mean, how to even rank them. They're all just fascinating and beautiful. Now, having said that, Craig Gilbert is a music ministry person, and I'm a pastor person. And together we edited and wrote a book called Launching a New Worship Community. And that book comes out in August, and then we're going to be doing online groups that are teams of people from churches that are interested in doing something fresh and new in worship, in addition to or in lieu of what we have been doing. Okay, and during this fluid season, when we're still trying to find what does faithfulness look like on this new side of the pandemic, I think it would be an excellent opportunity for some churches to go on an adventure and just to kind of start with a blank piece of paper and looking at the community and talking to the community and building some conversation there, out of which new worship experiences and communities can arise. The about a third of the book, Launching a New Worship Community, is dealing with community one-on-ones and development of just getting to know folks and building relationships in the neighborhood. I mean, because if you're not doing that, you're not doing it right. Church has to grow up out of the neighborhood. We plant churches in neighborhoods. They're not hydroponic tomatoes. They have to go, their roots have to go into the dirt of the neighborhood. Okay. So anyway, that's one of the things that I'm up to in these days.
Wonderful. And for any of you who want links to their work, we will be sending out an email to all of you afterwards. We can find links to Paul's work, to Kenda's work, to Ministry Incubators, to Epicenter Group, and the book series that they both wrote for as well. Before I turn it over to Alan to tell us a little bit about what's going on at the BTS Center, I'd like to invite you, in an exercise of gratitude, to just write a word of thanks, a gift you've taken from this conversation in the chat so that we can celebrate all that we've experienced together. And as you do that, Alan, I'm going to turn it over to you to share about what's going on for us at the BTS Center.
Excellent. Thank you, Ben. And thank you, Paul and Kenda, for this conversation. Just so rich, so much to think about. Thank you, Ben, for facilitating so well. Just scanning the chat box, I noticed we have people here from Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, North Carolina, Ohio, Georgia, Wisconsin, New Mexico, Missouri, Winnipeg, Canada, and London. Apologies if I missed anyone, but so glad to have all of you here today. Let me just share a couple of things. Next Friday, a week from tomorrow, we're really looking forward to this event, Brave Art. It's a day-long retreat led by contemplative painter Bronwyn Meyer Henry. We're thinking a lot about the importance of creative practice to spark imagination as we confront some of the biggest issues that faith communities and our planet face. So this retreat will weave together stories, meditations, creative practices, and supportive conversations, drawing upon the beauty of the natural world as a source of inspiration. It's not too late to register, so we encourage you to go to our website, thebtscenter.org, and check that out if you're interested. Also want to draw your attention to a new resources page on our website, where we have a brand new resource called the Leadership Commons. And in the Leadership Commons, you'll find a series of programs that are ready to use within your congregational setting. A 7-week book study using the collection Rooted and Rising, with videos of interviews that we did with 7 of the authors, and several other resources there that we want to encourage you to check out, along with this page, Earthbound Practices. These are asynchronous practices that you can use on your own to nurture your spiritual life, especially in connection with the earth. And then a video library, which is rich with recordings of many of the conversations that we've had over the last 14 months or so. Just encourage you to check that out as you have a moment. And then coming up this summer, not on our website yet, but you're hearing it here first, we're looking forward to a 3-part summer art series that's coming together. A big event in July with the editors of the book, All We Can Save, a great collection by women authors, Truth, Courage, and Solutions for the Climate Crisis. So we're really looking forward to that. a wild spirituality retreat in August, and of course, our annual convocation coming up for 2 days in late September. So keep watching our website, thebtscenter.org, to learn more. Thank you so much, and thanks, and back to you, Ben.
So thank you all. Thank you. I want to name a few pieces of gratitude from the chat for the metaphor of shipwreck, for upliftment and encouraging, for prophetic imagination in 4 steps, for the permission to use disruption to do things differently, for powerful metaphors and optimism and permission to keep things simple, for the permission to carpe diem and carpe our imagination, for thought-provoking wisdom, for permission to seize the weirdness and use the opportunity to try new things, for remembering that desperation is a spiritual gift, for encouragement and hope, for being what it means to be drop-kicked 20 years into the future, for sparking great ideas, for a life-giving hour. Thank you, Paul and Kenda, for being with us and blessing us with your wisdom. Thank you all for coming, and thank you all for the faithful ministry you're doing in the midst of this challenging and time that is also full of hope and opportunities. As we close today, I'm going to invite us to return to where we were at the beginning of this conversation, which is breath. So again, I'm going to invite you to check how you're seated, to check to see if your feet are rooted to the floor, to take a breath in, and then to breathe out, to breathe in gratitude, and to breathe out hope. And I'd like to invite you to keep breathing and breathing in and out that spirit of honesty, of hope, of love as we head into this future together. Thank you all for coming, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.